Imagine getting arrested for touching a cat. Not hurting it, not stealing it, just touching it. In the wrong context, at the wrong time, in the wrong place. And the punishment was not a fine, not community service, not a strongly worded letter from your local magistrate. The punishment could be death. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where the laws were real, the enforcement was serious, and some of the rules that govern daily life would make your head spin completely off your body. Egypt was one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history. It lasted, in various forms, for over 3,000 years. 3,000 years! For context, that is longer than the entire span of time between the fall of Rome and right now. The Egypt of Cleopatra was closer in time to the first iPhone than it was to the construction of the Great Pyramid. This was not a primitive society fumbling toward order. This was a highly organized, deeply legalistic civilization with courts, judges, written contracts, property rights, and a bureaucratic paper trail that put some modern governments to shame. And some of its laws were absolutely unhinged. Let's start with the cats. In ancient Egypt, cats were not pets in the way you think of pets. They were sacred. Specifically, they were associated with Bastet, the goddess of home, fertility, and protection, depicted with the head of a cat. Killing a cat, even accidentally, even if the cat walked directly under the wheel of your cart, was a capital offense. The Roman historian Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, documented a specific incident in which a Roman citizen in Egypt accidentally killed a cat. A mob formed. The Ptolemaic authorities, despite enormous political pressure from Rome not to escalate a diplomatic incident, could not stop the crowd. The man was killed. The cat had been avenged. But it went further than cats. Ibises, the long-beaked birds associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, were similarly protected. Harming one was a serious crime. Archaeologists excavating animal cemeteries across Egypt have found millions, literally millions, of mummified animals. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, baboons, dogs, bulls. This was not casual. This was a civilization that legislated the sacred status of animals at a level that had direct legal consequences for anyone who crossed the line. Now let's talk about salt. In ancient Egypt, salt was not just a seasoning. It was a preservative, a ritual substance, and a commodity of genuine economic value. But here is the law that makes modern people do a double take. In certain periods of Egyptian history, adulterating or tampering with salt supplies, mixing it with inferior substances, short-weighting it in trade, carried punishments up to and including mutilation. The same applied to grain. The same applied to bread. Food fraud in ancient Egypt was not a regulatory infraction. It was treated with the severity of a violent crime, because in an agricultural society operating on the edge of famine risk, corrupting the food supply was, in practical terms, an act of violence against the community. The Egyptians had a concept for this that ran through everything: ma'at. Usually translated as truth, justice, or cosmic order, ma'at was not just a philosophical idea. It was the animating principle behind Egyptian law. The idea was that the universe operated according to a divine balance, and human society, including its laws, its courts, its punishments, existed to maintain that balance. Violating the law was not just breaking a rule. It was disrupting the cosmic order of the universe itself. This gave Egyptian legal proceedings a weight that is almost impossible to fully translate into modern terms. When you stood before a judge in ancient Egypt, you were not just answering to a magistrate. You were answering to the order of creation. And the courts were real, genuinely real. Egyptologist John Coleman Darnell of Yale University, whose work deciphering ancient Egyptian inscriptions has illuminated enormous amounts about daily life in the New Kingdom period, has documented court records from the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, the community of craftsmen who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These records, preserved on limestone fragments called ostraca, reveal a functioning local court system where ordinary workers sued each other over unpaid debts, disputed property boundaries, accused each other of theft, and filed complaints about labor disputes. One surviving record documents a woman successfully suing her neighbor over a stolen pig. Another records a man taking his employer to court over withheld wages. The Egyptians had lawyers. Sort of. They had professional advocates, individuals who could argue cases on behalf of clients who were not confident speaking for themselves. They had written contracts, witnessed and sealed, that were legally binding in court. They had something very close to a presumption of innocence in certain case types, where the accuser bore the burden of proof. For a society operating 4,000 years ago, the sophistication of the legal machinery is genuinely astonishing. But then there are the laws that remind you exactly how different this world was. Tomb robbery was a capital offense, obviously. Egypt was a civilization built on elaborate burial practices and the belief that the afterlife was real, accessible, and dependent on the physical preservation of the body and its grave goods. Robbing a tomb was not stealing from the dead, it was destroying someone's eternal existence. The punishment reflected this. Convicted tomb robbers faced execution, often preceded by severe torture. And yet tomb robbery was rampant. Archaeologists have found almost no royal tomb that was not robbed in antiquity, most of them within decades or even years of the burial. The law was absolute. The enforcement was apparently more complicated. Here is one that will make you look up from your phone. In ancient Egypt, there were laws governing dreams. Specifically, there were legal provisions around the interpretation of dreams and the obligations that arose from them. If a god appeared to you in a dream and issued a command to build a temple, to make an offering, to take a specific action, this was treated as a legally and religiously binding instruction. Temples kept professional dream interpreters on staff. Individuals could submit written accounts of their dreams to temple authorities for official interpretation. And the failure to act on a divine dream command, if the dream was later verified as genuine by temple authorities, could carry real social and legal consequences. This was not fringe superstition. This was the mainstream operation of one of the most powerful states in the ancient world. Let's talk about one more, the law of the Pharaoh's shadow. In certain periods of Egyptian history, there were strict regulations around approaching the pharaoh's person, not just rules of protocol, but actual legal prohibitions. Touching the pharaoh uninvited was a crime. Meeting the pharaoh's direct gaze without permission was, in some contexts, a transgression. Even allowing your shadow to fall across the pharaoh's shadow was considered a violation of the divine boundary between the mortal and the sacred. The pharaoh was not a king in the way you think of kings. The pharaoh was a god in human form, the living embodiment of Horus, the divine intermediary between the cosmic order and the human world. Laws around his person were not matters of etiquette. They were matters of theology enforced by the state. And here is where the counterintuitive twist lives. For all the strangeness, for all the cat vengeance and dream law and shadow prohibition, ancient Egypt had something that many far more recent civilizations took centuries longer to develop. Legal rights for women. In ancient Egypt, women could own property independently of their husbands. They could inherit. They could initiate divorce. They could sue in court and be sued. They could enter into contracts. They could run businesses. Egyptologist Gay Robbins, in her landmark study of women in ancient Egypt, documents case after case of Egyptian women operating with legal agency that their counterparts in ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and most of medieval Europe simply did not have. A Greek woman in the classical period could not initiate legal proceedings without a male guardian. An Egyptian woman 4,000 years earlier could take her neighbor to court over a stolen pig and win. The law was strange. The law was sometimes brutal. The law made room for sacred cats and divine dreams and the cosmic weight of a shadow. But it also made room for something that many civilizations much closer to our own time failed to figure out. Imagine getting arrested for touching a cat. And imagine living in a society where, at the same time, a woman could walk into a court of law, stand before a judge, and argue her own case. Ancient Egypt contained both of these things. So do most places, if you look closely enough.